Good morning. Our first reading is Jeremiah chapter 8, verses 18 through to the first verse of chapter 9. My joy is gone, grief is upon me, my heart is sick. Hark, the cry of my poor people from far and wide in the land. Is the Lord not in Zion? Is her king not in her? Why have they provoked me to anger with their images and their foreign idols? The harvest is past, the summer is ended, and we are not saved. For the hurt of my poor people I am hurt. I mourn, and dismay has taken hold of me. Is there no balm in Gilead? Is there no physician there? Why then has the health of my poor people not been restored? Oh, that my head were a spring of water, my eyes a fountain of tears, so that I might weep day and night for the slain of my poor people. The word of the Lord. Our second reading is 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 1 through 7. First of all, then, I urge that supplications, prayers, intercessions, and thanksgivings be made for everyone, for kings and all who are in high positions, so that we may lead a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and dignity. This is right and acceptable in the sight of God our Savior, who desires everyone to be saved and to come to the knowledge of the truth. For there is one God. There is also one mediator between God and humankind, Jesus Christ, himself human, who gave himself a ransom for all. This was attested at the right time. For this I was appointed a herald and an apostle. I am telling the truth, I am not lying. A teacher of the Gentiles in faith and truth. Word of the Lord. Our final reading is from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 16, verses 1 through 13. Then Jesus said to the disciples, "There was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was squandering his property. So he summoned him and said to him, 'What is this I hear about you? Give me an accounting of your management, because you cannot be my manager any longer.' Then the manager said to himself, 'What will I do now that my master is taking the position away from me? I am not strong enough to dig, and I am ashamed to beg. I have decided what to do so that when I am dismissed as a manager, people may welcome me into their homes.' So, summoning his master's debtors one by one, he asked the first, 'How much do you owe my master?' He answered, 100 jugs of olive oil. He said to him, 'Take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 50. Then he asked another, 'And how much do you owe?' The man replied, 100 containers of wheat. He said to him, 'Take your bill and make it 80. And his master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the children of this age are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than are the children of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of dishonest wealth, so that when it is gone, they may welcome you into the eternal homes. Whoever is faithful in a very little is faithful also in much, and whoever is dishonest in a very little is dishonest also in much. If then you have not been faithful with the dishonest wealth, who will you entrust your true riches? And if you have not been faithful with what belongs to another, who will give you what is your own? No slave can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth." The word of the Lord.
The word of the Lord. Ouch. My dear brothers and sisters, as we continue with our sermon series titled What Disciples Do, today's sermon's title is called Disciples Resist Greed. And I think that it is in one of the church's early promotions that we use the following line: traditional worship for contemporary Christians. I truly hope that it refers to the preaching. But if not, I would like you to think that it refers to the preaching. The thing is that preaching is often said on the circumstances that are happening. Disciples must be warned. Disciples need to be reminded that on many occasions, using the brakes will save your life. And today is a good day to be reminded that there are consequences for our actions and our inactions, especially when we live lives or are close to people who always are hungry for more. Let's take a look at the word greed. It is defined as an intense and selfish desire for something, especially wealth, power, or food. Here's another definition: ugly, insatiable, and give us the origin of the word. Greed comes from the Old English gretic or voracious, which means always hungry for more. In other words, my brothers and sisters, a person can be insatiably hungry for money, but also for fame, possessions, attention, compliments, gifts, another person's time, and more. One thing is clear: greed is always self-centered and is never satisfied. Let's go to the scriptures. In Jeremiah, we have the prophet in pain, suffering for the anguishes of the people. My joy is gone. Grief is upon me. My heart is sick. Hark, the cry of my poor people from far and wide in the land. Is the Lord not in Zion? Is her king not in her? And God, through the prophet, kind of asked himself, why have they provoked me to anger with their images, with their foreign idols? And in a rhetorical question asks, the harvest is past, the summer is ended, and we are not safe. In life, there seems often to be a point of no return. And that thing in the scripture is called a hardening of the heart. The Hebrew people had turned against God. They had a hardening of the heart. And when self-interest and personal gain control our actions for so long, it is not even possible for that person to see or act differently. The risk with this is that a society that focuses on acquiring material things or personal fulfillment, ambition, and accumulation will eventually develop a stiff heart. And the risk lays in the possibility that this pattern of behaviors are so rigid that they cannot be given up even when they are wrong-headed and disastrous. You see the irony? I know it's bad for me, but I'm still going to do it. I know it's bad, but I do not care. I know I will hurt someone, but life is all about me. When people are in this mindset, there is nothing that can stop them. So they think, so they believe. Before we go to the Gospel of Luke, let me ask you a question. What are you willing to do for $10 million? There are several online polls about this, but I will refer to one that's really old from 1991, another that's from 2007. What are you willing to do for $10 million? Survey said 25% said would abandon their entire family. 25% said will abandon their church. 23% said will become prostitutes for a week or more. 16% said would give up their American citizenship. 16% said would leave their spouses. 10% said would withhold testimony and let a murderer go free. 7% answered, I will kill a stranger. 3%, shame on them, will put their children up for adoption for $10 million. I want to share with you Sir Fred Catherwood's definition of greed. It is the logical result of the belief that there is no life after death. We grab what we can while we can, however we can, and then hold onto it hard. In the Gospel of Luke, we have a very confusing parable. The story concerns two figures, a rich man and his steward. In this story, charges are brought to the rich man that the steward has been squandering his property. If you know your Bible, you know that these are the same charges that are brought to the prodigal son. All of a sudden, in Luke's gospel, an internal dialogue occurs. That's the steward thinking, what will I do? What will I do? What will I do? What will I do? And for him, that's a life or death question. To dig? Do manual labor? Me? I'm not strong enough. To beg? I am too ashamed or too proud. Absolutely not. So in this nino moment, in his interior monologue, the steward found a solution, an alternative that will make him welcome in others' homes after he has been dismissed by his master. Listen, he doesn't say that he's going to come up clean, that he will fix or accept the consequences. He simply found what he thought was the best way to end his imminent crisis. His solution was calling all the master's debtors and immediately reduce the debt of each. In other words, he shaved a substantial amount of money, a substantial amount of debt. And his hope was that by doing that, by reducing the amounts of the debt, while he is still in the service of the rich man, since he wasn't fired yet, he will gain their favor. That way, the rich man will not be able to reverse his actions later without losing face with his debtors. And the steward will have acquired a debt of honor and gratitude from each debtor that will ensure their goodwill toward him in the future. Sneaky? Someone say, yeah. Smart? I don't want to look. Impressive? Was he a Renaissance man? This parable is so confusing that it has several interpretations or exegesis. It has three. Here they are. Number one, the steward was cheating the master by reducing the size of the debts. Number two, the steward was acting righteously by excluding the interest that had been figured into the debt, interest prohibited by the word in Deuteronomy 23, 19 and 20. Or the steward reduced the debt due by the amount of his own commission, which had been included in the debt. If you have the book Jesus Through the Middle Eastern Eyes, written by Kenneth Bailey, which you can see it in my office, it was really good reading this week, You already know that the best interpretation is number 1. The steward was cheating the master by reducing the size of the debts. Is this the right interpretation, Luis? Please. Yes. So this means that Christians can be accused of cheaters and liars? Yes. And early Christianity was. But that is true if you only read until verses 8. No. If you read verses 9 through 13 and understand that Jesus is talking to his disciples and warning them that although he sympathizes with people's smarts, his disciples, us, needed to be different. Different disciples need to be aware of their permanent residence, of our eternal home, and remember that the end game is not to make unrighteous wealth, but to be welcomed by God. One thing should be clear. Faithfulness and honesty are not related to wealth and power. You can be wealthy and faithful and have money. That is okay. What is not is acquiring dishonest wealth. Remember the saying, once a cheater, always a cheater. Disciple resist greed because the end game of discipleship is heaven. And we know that God is not going to give our treasure if we weren't honest with and took good care of the ones he gave us in earth. That is why no slave can serve two masters. We cannot serve God and wealth. Wealth can serve as a means and an opportunity for securing one's place in the kingdom if used discerningly for the sake of others. Materialism, my brothers and sisters, enslave us. And we cannot forget that God requires exclusive loyalty. Even the Shema, the Hebrew Shema, the prayer that they say every morning and afternoons, that says, you shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart. The whole thing that you have, if it's small and large or whatever size it is, with all your heart you should love and serve God. Remember, the way we use what we have reveals who we truly are and also reveals who we truly serve. Christians are to be faithful whether we deal with little things or vast resources. Then when we worship God rather than our wealth, we will find that we truly have friends in high places. Remember that what are you willing to do for $10 million question that I asked you before? I just want to reframe it. What are you willing to do for God with the same energy, drive, strength, passion, eagerness, vigor that we will do for $10 million? Will you serve God with the same commitment and passion that you will seek $10 million? People more than often confuses church with God. I come here as part of the corporate church. We believe that we are part of the universal church, which is composed of many sons and daughters of the light. I totally believe that congregating is important, period. But the reason why we all come here is based or should be based on the following question. What are you willing to do for God? Even me, who has a different job description, comes here asking myself, what are you, Luis, willing to do for God? And I found the answers in your faces when you share with me joys and sometimes sorrows, when we prayed as a group, in the activities that we participate or sponsor, when we sing, when the choir sings, while sermon prepping, when Ali plays the piano, when the children practice with Anna. Those are the reasons that remind me why I am here. What am I willing to do for God? What are you willing to do for God? Why does Jesus condemn materialism so harshly? Many reasons can be given. It is a fast and easy way to start placing things above God. We damage creation because ultimately we waste our lives in a worthless pursuit to accumulate more and more stuff that we think we need, but we don't. There is no doubt that the steward had a talent, fast thinking under duress. He had skills. He can talk. He was a smooth talker. Can you imagine all the things that he could accomplish having used those skills and talents for God? I just want to share with you this short story by Leo Tolstoy. He once wrote a story about a successful peasant farmer who was not satisfied with his lot. He wanted more of everything. One day he received a noble offer. For 1,000 rubles, he could buy all the land he could walk around in a day. The only catch of the deal was that he had to be back at his starting point by sundown. Early the next morning, he started out walking at a fast pace. By midday, he was very tired, but he kept going, covering more and more ground. Well into the afternoon, he realized that his greed had taken him so far from the starting point that he quickened his pace, and as the sun began to sink low in the sky, he began to run, knowing that if he did not make it back by sundown, the opportunity to become an even bigger landholder will be lost. He was tired, he was sweaty, but he kept going. As the sun began to sink below the horizon, he came within sight of the finish line. I am so close, I'm going to make it. Gasping for breath, his heart pounding, he called upon every bit of strength left in his body and staggered across the line just before the sun disappeared. He immediately collapsed, blood streaming from his mouth. In a few minutes, he was dead. Afterwards, his servant dug a grave. It was not much over 6 feet long and 3 feet wide. The title of Tolstoy's story, How Much Land Does a Man Need? 6 foot long by 3 feet wide. The world is so full of unsatisfied and insatiable things that has forgotten there is only one God and one mediator, whose name is Jesus Christ, the one that gave himself as ransom for us. And like Timothy suggests, that is why we should pray for leaders, kings and presidents, public servants, policy makers, and those called to enforce the policies. Pray for everyone from the least of those to the Pharisees. Pray for ourselves until we come to ourselves and our senses and seek God's mercy. Pray until we see the error of our ways and know we must make a change that causes us ask God to forgive our debts as we forgive our debtors. Disciples should receive and remember that Jesus is calling us to loyalty and service to the one who is merciful and abounding in steadfast love, teaching us to scatter grace, not to squander our gifts. If we practice being faithful, even in little, our discipleship management skills will be refined, and maybe God will praise us and entrust us with much. Remember, we cannot serve two masters. Soli Deo Gloria.